Ezra didn't get the time to let out an unprofessional scream before he landed on his back. The air left his chest on impact, and everything hurt. Ezra fought to breathe and choked on the dust in the air, and then stopped. Thrawn and him had been in a mud ball of a planet, not a dust ball. Ezra officially had no clue where he was. Blaster fire ripped him out of his moment as he threw himself behind the closet cover. No matter where he was at what part of his life, getting shot at seemed to be a constant. He fell into a battlefield mindset with ease, taking in his surroundings. An unknown planet with minimal cover and unknown terrain. Ezra chanced a look behind him at his opponent and just about laughed. Ancient separatist models if he was right. Last time Ezra had seen those, he'd still been a stupid Padawan, and Kanan and Rex had both smacked some sense into him. Now Ezra was smarter, and he knew his limits. And with ancient rickety droids, his limits were a lot. Dropping his center of gravity low, he reached out and grasped a hold of the data processing in the nearest battle droid, feeling the hum of data flow transmitting back to their commander droid, and eventually the processing center that controlled them. The wireless transfer hummed as he sank into battle meditation Kanan had taught him and listened to the data flow. Kanan had taught him how to be a Jedi. Rex had taught him how to be a warrior. Maul had taught him how to be a powerful threat. And Thrawn had begrudgingly taught him how to be a master strategist. It was on that Ezra drew on. He exhaled slowly and focused on the data streaming past him and began logically deducting the probabilities of the security code. Spending 3 years with Thrawn had taught him patience and precision when it came to the strategic thinking process. Now, deducting the correct security passcode of billions is nearly impossible. But finding the right data stream to the security hub and then corrupting it? Not so impossible. Ezra tightened his grip on the transmission and carefully sorted through the lines before finding the security line. Tracing it over the desolate planet through the automated switchboard and up to the blockade ship above wasn't that hard. Ezra grinned as he yanked the line as hard as possible from the servers deep inside the ship. The line shuddered and died. In his mind's eye, Ezra could see the server room erupt into flames, setting off a cascade of reactions. The droid army stalled out and then sputtered and died. Success. Ezra stood looking over his handiwork. The whole entire fence. A flash of warning rang through the force, and Ezra threw himself left in time to miss more blaster fire past his head. He huffed in irritation as spider-like droids with imitating ray shields skittered over their fallen allies, still shooting. Right. Those rolling balls of metal blaster fire and death. What had Rex called them? My nose. Those criffers. Those criffers. Ezra bobbed, avoiding blaster fire as he raced forward. Rex and Ahsoka had both trained him on these types of shielded machines. You had to be going slow and low to get through the shield, but you had to be fast to get close enough to do so and not get shot. Ezra dove under the guns, bolting hard and fast, and then froze directly under the droid's sensor. The shield passed over him, and he quickly grabbed onto the bottom of the casing of the droid and hooked his feet under as well. Now hanging under the droid, Ezra pulled out his laser cutter and switched the setting down short to cut through the casing to the inner workings. The many pieces of his saber dug into his back and limb as he pulled out the tangle of cords from the chassis of the droid that was still skittering around with him under it. He was loath to use the weapon he'd created after leaving his green one behind with Sabine when he had no idea where he was. Few planets in the unknown regions had known of Jedi, and those that had severely inaccurate and old data. Getting heralded as a god when he showed up with it and wielding the Force got old real fast. He yanked all the cords out with one quick yank, prompting it to collapse almost on him. Scrambling so he can stick his head in the hole he made, Ezra took in the circuitry quickly. These droids ran on the same programming style as the basic battle droids did, but with internal processing instead of an outsourced transmission. Ezra quickly yanked the power for that particular droid and then hunted for the sync connection between the rest of the rolling death balls. Blaster fire erupted outside his shell, and the hum of the shield made Ezra grateful he hadn't turned that part off. But he knew it wouldn't last forever. Yanking the casing and obstacles out, he found the security pad and instinctively reached out and punched in the first code that came to him in the Force. The security cleared, giving him the inner workings again. Blaster fire lit up the shield again, and the chassis groaned. Something hissed by his right shoulder. Ezra tuned it out along with his growing unease and tried to whittle down which line synced all the droids together. A hum sputtered and died by his shoulder again, and then the whole droid shuttered. There went the shield. Running out of options, Ezra went with the second best one, yanking the cognitive targeting line and the sync he'd cut and crossed them, made sure it was secured, and then booted the power back on before dropping out of the droid and bolting. Behind him, the two rolling droids started shooting each other up. Rex had said they were simple pieces of machinery, but Ezra hadn't expected it to be that blazing easy. "Who better you?" a modulated voice yelled out, making Ezra whip around to find a white-clad humanoid trooper coming towards him, brandishing his rather bulky military blaster threateningly as he came towards him. "What are you going here?" "Ah, Criff. Troopers! Why'd it have to be so blazing hard?" Ezra put his hands up quickly, mentally trying to come up with a story for Imperial stormtroopers of how he'd dropped literally into one of their battles with ancient droids that wouldn't get him arrested. The first trooper tapped his comm. "Commander, I found the anomaly." So they knew about the whole force spat me out here thing. There were more of them. A squad of troopers crested the rocky hill behind the single trooper, coming towards them quickly. Was that? Purple? Ezra eyed the unique color patterns on the squad with concern. Only the best of the most dangerous companies in the Empire got color. And he'd never heard of purple on any of the known kill squads, which wasn't good. "What's up with the color?" Ezra asked, playing dumb. "You guys, someone's entourage or something? How'd you get here?" The one with a different helmet design demanded. This probably meant he was the leader, which really wasn't good cause. As far as Ezra knew, rank was placed on pauldrons. The lack of response to his humor was also very bad. They weren't propaganda pushers spitting at him to stop talking or calling him names. They were all business. He was not liking this situation. Reaching out with the force, he added weight to his words. "I was already here when you started." The leader jerked back like Ezra had slapped him, and his voice filled with accusation, anger, and alarm. "No, you weren't." Fuck. There's no way he can salvage this, and he's not going to Mustafar or Inquisitores to be tortured to death or executed. He'll go out fighting, or he'll survive. Throwing the whole squad back with one huge push, he's calling his saber to hand and clicking the pieces together without even thinking. It jumps to life in his hand. Kanan had been onto something when he'd housed his weapon in multiple pieces when on the run. It got flagged as a weaponless. He throws out his senses, looking for a way out and for any incoming squads, only to run into a stone wall, cold presence instead. He's got one moment to think, "Oh, Carabast," and yank back before the presence is shifting to acknowledge him. Slamming down his own shields, Ezra looks around, quickly relying on his own senses to get him out of this one. He's got a dark user coming his way. He still has no clue where he is, and he's got at least one squad of elite troopers on his hand. Because, of course he does. Spotting one of the squad reaching for their comm, he reaches out and crushes all of their comms, squelching them before turning, leaping up the embankment and bolting. Not even a minute later, blaster fire fills the air again. Ezra listens to the Force's warning, weaving and dodging and blocking the occasional bolt as he tries his best to figure his way out of the craggy, dusty wasteland around him with no direction except for a way. He pauses a moment to try and figure out his directions and blocks a few more bolts before coming to a very chilling realization. They're stun blasts! These troopers aren't trying to kill him. They're trying to bring him in. They must have recognized him, which is very bad for him and also super concerning. He's grown and changed a lot over the last 3 years. The wanted picture they recognized him from had to be at least that old or older, which meant they were actually competent. Ezra had about 2 seconds to worry about that concerning development when blaster fire erupted from behind him. He pivoted just in time, igniting the other side of his double-sided blade in time to save himself from a stun blast to the face. They blocked him in those smart criffers. Relying on the agility Ahsoka had taught him, he ducked and wove through the blaster fire from both sides as he searched for a way out. But he'd underestimated the troopers, and now he was paying for it as 2 more squads came to assist, blocking his other points of escape. He was trapped. If he wanted to get out, he'd have to break out, which meant demolishing one of the sides of the enclosing circle while suppressing blaster fire. He'd done harder, but he knew if he didn't do it soon, he'd tire out from the day he'd had. Keeping pace with their shots easily, he reached out and felt for the weak link in the circle, someone he could use to break out. but he ran into fumbling and imperfect but secure mental shields in all of them. Not Force user shields, but those of someone who spent enough time around a Force user to naturally make shields. That was quite concerning. Ezra looked over all of them, trying to deduce from their movements who would be best when the Force user he'd accidentally bumped into earlier crested the hill. He was a black man, in surprisingly tan robes covered in dust from the battle and shockingly wielding a purple lightsaber. Ezra met the man's eyes, and his brain short-circuited. When Ahsoka had come to them when he had been much younger, she had brought training clips and taught him who each teacher was. And staring him in the face from across the way was Mace Windu. Mace had a lot on his plate. The war effort he didn't ask for, the council who was scrambling to respond to said effort after being placed in charge, the responsibility of the Order's well-being and safety, and his own campaign, which had just become both significantly easier and more complicated. He stared down the unconscious youth, strapped down to one of their med-bay stretchers, and reached out into the Force for answers. The Force did the equivalent of poking him back. Mace sighed silently and examined the boy closely. He was clean-shaven, and an average height with striking dark blue hair pulled back in a small ponytail. Blue eyes, olive-skinned, and altogether forgettable if it wasn't for the fact he had just shut off the whole B-1 droid army and reduced the droidka to only committing friendly fire and ignoring the clones. And then, of course, there was the part where the kid had almost attacked the clone squad trying to talk to him. He was altogether strange and feral, in a way that Mace tended to dislike. And then there was the matter of the boy's shields. Mace tended to think he had pretty strong mental shields, built as sturdy and sure as a solid stone wall. But the kid's shields were that of steel and concrete and Beskar. Unmovable, unbreakable, and utterly unreadable. Reaching out even now as he was out cold, the shields were still firmly in place, and it was like banging a lightsaber against Beskar plating. Not only did trying to touch them not work, it hurt. The ricochet Mace had gotten when he'd first tried to reach out and get a read in the kid after he was out was still giving him a headache. Or maybe it was the situation. Whichever one it was not going away, much to Mace's dismay. He sighed again, this time out loud, and leaned back. Why did his life have to be so stressful? "You all right, sir?" Pons asked quietly next to him. "Just a headache," Mace admitted, looking over at his commander. "Do you have anything to add to our situation?" Pons seemed to hesitate before unclipping something from his belt and holding it out. "We confiscated his lightsaber. I thought you would want to see it." Mace sighed, headache growing. "And just when I thought this couldn't be more complicated, you gift me another side of the picture." He turned the saber over in his hands, running his fingers over the crude design. It was a double-sided saber, though shorter than normal ones, probably to account for the boy's lack of height. The casing was mostly flattened on both sides, making it almost rectangular. It seemed cobbled together, not with designated lightsaber parts, but with odd ends and even junk. Whatever it took to make it work. Mace flipped the saber on and was met with a flat-edged black blade dipped in purple. A darksaber. The only known darksaber currently in use was the darksaber on Mandalore. And now this one, bathed in deep purple, not unlike his own. Another mystery. Mace reached out to acknowledge the Kyber crystal in the Force, and the crystal did the equivalent of hissing at him like a wet tuka. Mace drew back in surprise. While Kyber was semi-sentient and bonded with its chosen user, they tended to be rather calm when in contact with others and willing to be wielded by others. This one seemed almost downright hostile to other users. Mace flipped it off and turned to give it back to Pons and almost swore when the saber popped apart in his hands. Mace carefully held the two pieces and examined them closely. On cue, another chunk of the saber detached. So the Kyber really didn't like him. "Is it supposed to do that?" Pons asked. Two more pieces popped off, and Mace paused and looked down at the pieces in his hands. This wasn't just the Kyber spitting at him. The lightsaber was designed to come apart. "Yo?" "I think so." In his hands, now all looked like basic everyday tech. A comm unit was actually the power coupling between the two sabers. One of the sabers was a refined laser cutter when you removed the focusing lens on the top of it, and the focusing lens was a wrist-mounted scope. The other saber was now of a Jedi designed as Mace the sabers nor grace of the prior generations. It was not completely balanced or well made. It was crude and utilitarian but functional, and it had the novelty of being the first mace had ever seen of its kind. And it seemed to fit its wielder, a feral crystal, a crude design, a functional usage, and a mysteriously powerful blade, as much an enigma as it. Think about. I'll have agreed, turning and hunting for something before turning back with a smaller empty ammo box for Mace to put the saber pieces into. Let's put him in the med bay under 24-hour watch when we get back. I doubt the brig could hold him, and this way, we might have a chance of talking him down when he waves up. Mace sighed, putting the pieces into the box and letting his fingers linger on one of the crystal casings as he caught a feeling of something colder from them. Not the fridge coldness of the Sith, but certainly not the warm light of the Jedi. A certain wariness and caution forever rippling beneath the surface. I have a great many questions for him. When Pons had been assigned to High General Mace Windu, he had thought he'd had a vague idea of how his life and duties would go. He was very wrong. He'd never considered mercy missions as part of his duties, never considered chaperoning Jedi Littles to Ilum, or having cadets and Jedi Littles tours of how a destroyer operated. Perhaps he should have taken into consideration who his general was when he'd imagined his duties. Grandmaster Windu wasn't just a Master Jedi, but the protector and one of the heads of the Order. And while he was certainly an expert warrior, he was also a dedicated carer for the Jedi in his responsibilities. Pons had seen more of the temple than most of his peers ever would. Windu never shied from his duties, which were equally split between the temple and the war effort. Pons had learned to adapt to his altered duties, but some things it seemed he still hadn't been prepared for. He stared down at the unconscious stranger they'd acquired and sighed. And here he'd thought this only happened to Cody and Rex. If only. How does he look? Pons asked, looking over at his CMO Ulsa, who was scanning the kid over. Like he got trapped by wildebeests. His gruff CMO huffed. All his ribs show some sort of stress. 3 of them show signs of being broken and mended without any sign of medical assistance. His arm also had signs of breaking, but that one was set. His lungs show signs of past infection as well as low-level toxic consumption, and don't get me started on his blood work. Pons followed Ulsa away from the patient and over to one of the holoconsoles. What's wrong with it? Good God! Ulsa spat, tossing down his scanner. Try freaking everything! His blood work is all over the charts. He's got antibodies in his bloodstream that seem to function against something close to the blue virus, which we both know doesn't have a marketed cure. His blood sugar markers and nutrition ate in the garbage chute, and he's got what seem to be vaccines in him that just come up as unknown in the database. You're known. Ulsa snarled out. Pons raised an eyebrow as Ulsa viciously punched the buttons on the console. There was a reason Ulsa had gotten his name from stressing over every patient quite vocally, but even this was odd. What does unknown mean? It means that it isn't in the Galactic Medical Registry. Ulsa snapped. You know, wherever medical item must be registered before use, legally. So you think it's illegal? Pons frowned. What? No. He's got like 4 very different, unique, unidentified strands in him, and they're way too clean and professional to be illegal. Ulsa shook his head, sighing. I don't know what they are, but they're completely safe. But also undocumented, Pons pointed out, frowning deeper. Yeah, Ulsa agreed lamely. That too. That was very strange. Pons wasn't sure what to make of it, but it was certainly different. Anything else you can tell me about him? Well, he's about 20-ish. Some of the other tests we ran showed he's a bit stunted when an adolescent. He's got a museum's worth of scars, most of which are healed with some to no medical care. Somehow, the one on his cheek is the only thing that left a big mark. His nutrition, as of late, is dismal and completely confusing, and he's a good 20 pounds below the average weight for his age and height. His body shows signs of serious wear, either from fighting or abuse. I can't tell. He's got the scars of a warrior, the wear and tear of a vagabond, and the nutrition of a street rat. All in all, Ulsa looked up from reading off his chart. He's been through the ringer and back again. I don't know where this kid's been, but it hasn't been good. Pons nodded his thanks. and thought over these new facts silently as he went back to the bed to watch over the patient. Something about the kid didn't sit right, especially now when he was lying peacefully and still no longer trying to kill them. Pons thought back to when he'd first encountered the kid standing there so blatantly out of place on the battlefield. And when the kid had tried to mind trick him, Pons remembered the ghost touch, as firm and certain, but not bitterly cold as the Sith's vicious claws he'd encountered had been. Nor the warm, whispering, feather-like touch that the Jedi had. No, it had been firm but not hurtful, cool but not cold nor warm. Pons would never forget the fear on the kid's face when he'd called him out on it. For a split second, the kid's eyes had widened in seared terror before he'd go stone-faced. But he wasn't a danger, nor Pons doubted. A Sith. Mace would have dealt with him if he had been. No, he wasn't a threat, nor the way he'd scrambled away, desperation bleeding into his movements as he fled them. He had had no taste for blood, hadn't moved to engage them, just ran. He was simply a desperate, dedicated but scared kid, and that confused Pons most. It was bad enough that he didn't know where the kid had come from, but it was worse that he didn't know where the kid stood in the grand scheme of it all. He wasn't a threat or a Sith, but was he an enemy? He wasn't just a naive kid, he moved with too much purpose for that. But what he meant for everything, the war, the Vode, the Jedi, Pons didn't have the faintest. Sighing heavily, Pons mentally shelved the thoughts and took a look around. A 4-person guard posted around, and just outside the medbay should cover it. And besides, they were on a Gar destroyer. Where was the kid gonna go? Pons turned to go and froze when proving sky-blue eyes met his own. The kid hadn't moved an inch from the bed he was shackled to nor made a sound, but his eyes were now wide open and alert. Pons stood there staring, frozen for a moment as they locked eyes before he slowly turned to face the bed. "You're up." The kid blinked, eyes wide as they finally left Pons's face to roam over Pons's armor and then around the medbay before landing on Pons's face again. "You're a clone." Pons blinked. Of all the things he'd thought was about to happen, that wasn't it, yes? The boy slowly, despite his shackles, pushed himself to sit straight up, bringing that attention to the rest of his guard. He ignored them and looked around, eyes jumping from one barefaced clone to the next. "You're all clones." "Yeah, what of it, kid?" Ulsa grouched, coming over next to Pons. "You're in a Gar medbay, what do you expect?" The kid stared at Ulsa wide-eyed before snorting and then grinning huge and wide and crazed and throwing his head back as he fell back into his bed and laughing loud and hard and long like he has just been told the best joke in the galaxy. His crazed laughter didn't stop and made everyone jump and then look uneasily at each other. Ulsa and Pons shared a look before Pons moved to do what he should have done at the beginning of this mess and commend the general. This was so beyond his job description. Mace fought not to shift under the combined weight of all the council members' stares. Sure, what he's just explained to them was a bit outlandish, but after sitting through crazier explanations from Kenobi and Skywalker, he hadn't thought there'd be this jarring of a reaction. "So you're saying a young man fell out of the sky?" Shak repeated slowly. "And then used the Force to take out the whole division of droids and droidica on the planet, before almost taking out a squad of your troops." "JediEzra. And you believe he is not a Sith?" "But he did have a lightsaber," Skywalker checked. "JediEzra. Not in the records. His DNA is," Yoda said solemnly. Mace had figured. He isn't temple trained. He's got no form. He's not a Sith, but... Mace hesitated. "I'm not sure he's a Jedi either." "Then what is he?" Skywalker asked, nose wrinkling. "I'm not sure," Mace admitted. "He's got iron control of his shields." I didn't feel much, but what I did feel, he thought for a moment, trying to find the words. It's not light or dark. He's chaos. But it's not just that. I can sense great power in him, like a disruption. "What do you mean by disruption?" Koth asked, clearly confused. Mace thought about it hard. It was always difficult finding the words to verbalize the shatter points he could sense. Like a Rathtar in the middle of a desert. Dangerous, chaotic, and even more violent due to being somewhere it does not understand. His Force signature. It isn't meant to be. It's not right, it doesn't fit. It is like we are calm waters, and he is suddenly a mountain jutting up and causing ripples from appearing. Like his appearance has changed everything in the Force. Deeper, ever calm, nodded slowly. That the path we were on is now no more, because he is now here. Mace nodded slowly. Yes, like that. Why do you think he is? Shaq asked, frowning furrowed in concentration after a long beat of silence. I'm not sure. B. He didn't attack anyone immediately. Activate the Sith was powerful. So he's not a destructive Sith, but he get some answers out of him of where he came from and what he is, and how he knew the Separatist access codes, Mace said firmly. We're en route now. And the boy? Mondi asked. Where is he? Unconscious in the med bay. Mace was interrupted by a ping on his comm from Pons. Or perhaps not, unconscious. How long until you're on Coruscant? Plo asked kindly. 3 days non-stop in hyperspace. Mace read off the nav next to him. Good idea this is. Yoda nodded slowly. To Coruscant. I also shall head. A most intriguing development this is. I think it would be in all our interests to return to Coruscant to convene and hear what this boy has to say for himself, Deepa suggested calmly. The rest of the council chorused their agreement, and it was settled. They would reconvene in person on Coruscant in 1 week's time. Mace agreed and signed off before opening a comm channel to Pons. Yes, Commander? There was some sort of hiccuping background noise, but nothing concerning as Pons spoke. You might want to get down here, General. The kid's awake. Mace nodded to the communications officer and hurried out of the holoroom and heard for the lifts. Has he said anything? Oh, that's just it, sir. Pons hesitated. He's laughing. Mace paused now in the elevator as he punched the button for the medbay and raised an eyebrow to the empty lift at Pons' words. Laughing? Yes, sir. The hysterical kind. It seems to be a reaction to the fact that we are all clones, sir, Pons said, sounding uncomfortable. The background noise made a lot more sense now. What do you mean? Mace asked, trying not to be irritated that the lift was taking so long. Well, it was... Well, and then he felt... Eh? Mace winced. The CMO didn't have a soft bone in his body, all blunt and honest. The reaction, though, was quite interesting. I see. And how is he now? Hiccuping, sir, Pons reported. Seems he's starting to calm down now, but he's still got wide eyes. See. Mace sighed as the lift finally came to a stop. Stanby! I'm on my way to you. Copy that, sir, Pons acknowledged. Eh? Mace fought the urge to sigh again as he started briskly walking down the hall towards Medbay. Why couldn't Kenobi and Skywalker have kept the tendency for Force Oisk finding them to themselves? One would think that through the years of getting shot at, scrapping for food, discovering you have powerful abilities that people would kill you for, joining up and leading a rebellion against an evil empire, and fully routing possibly the smartest admiral in history after going up against the evilest and most powerful emperor in existence and coming out unscathed, one would stop being surprised. They were wrong. Ezra knew he had freaked out the clones, knew that his responses were less than healthy, knew that laughing about this probably wasn't the best idea. But if he didn't laugh right now, he'd probably cry. He'd been so close. There had been only 2 more fuel jumps till the known areas of wild space. They had been out, over, safe. And now, he was here. Over 20 years in the past, alone from everything and everyone he knew, without any way home. So yes, if he didn't laugh at his situation, he was going to cry. And gratefully, there was a lot to find funny about this situation. Because him, and only him, could somehow criff up so badly that they were thrown back into the Clone Wars mostly unscathed, basically into the arms of the Grand Master of the Order. Palpatine was probably still wrinkle-free. Hera would be a stupid teenager, if Hera could indeed be stupid at all. He doubted it, and Sabine was a criffing toddler. Zeb was the only one who was even remotely an adult right now, and, of course, then there was Kanan. Or was it Caleb? Ezra could feel a headache coming on. He would be a Padawan now. Perhaps not even that. It hurt as much as it soothed to even think about it. Ezra pushed all those thoughts away. Right now, he needed to figure out what the Kark he was going to tell. He couldn't in a minute, and wreck happened in those last days of the war rang loud in his ears as he looked around at them, which was doing nothing for his anxiety at the white armor. If he closed his eyes, he could envision Rex's scar exactly. He'd need to find a way to prove the chip thing to the Jedi in a short period of time. Palpatine was a whole other issue. Claiming he was from the future was one thing. Saying that the army was rigged to kill the Jedi was another. But accusing the sitting head of the Senate of treason, collusion, and being the Sith Lord organizing the war was something else. If the first two didn't land him in hot water, that the third one might just end him in jail. If, of course, Sidious didn't have him killed first. There was also the matter of his training. Ezra was under no assumption about his dog cemented that he had great anger in him and a good amount of hate, not to mention the chaos. Thrawn had called him feral, and Ezra had worn it with pride. Once a Lothal street rat, always a street rat. But he wasn't a Sith. He knew that after dealing with Maul, he was somewhere between. Ahsoka had called him a Grey Jedi. Kanan had shrugged and said it really didn't matter. He was good in his core. And the Empire on the rise and the galaxy getting progressively worse. That had been all that mattered. But now, in the age of the blindingly light Jedi, it was going to be a problem. To them, he would be tainted, not light enough. But considering where he had grown up and how he had been raised, he was very lucky he was light at all. But how exactly to explain all that? Ezra wiped the wetness off his face, best he could with his shoulders while trying to get his breathing under control after laughing and then hiccuping his way through his emotions. The head clone was eyeing his warily, which Ezra really couldn't blame him for all things considered. The medic moved around him, fiddling with this and that on his charts and read out grumpily, and Ezra cracked a smile. The medic reminded him of Zeb. The door swished open, and Mace Windu swept in. The clone snapped to attention, but Mace just stared at Ezra. If Ezra had been a weaker person, he would have cowered at the stare down. But after traveling with Thrawn and receiving more than his fair share of chilly emotionless glares, Ezra simply raised an eyebrow back at the man. Hi? Mace blinked before turning to Pons and the medic. How is he? Ezra rolled his eyes but held his tongue. He was fine, thank you very much. If this ship was anything like the design of an Imperial destroyer, he could slip these cuffs and be 3/4 off the way off the ship in under 10 minutes in his condition right now. He figured that probably wasn't the best thing to say in the given situation, though. Fine, the medic said. Thank you. But his nutrition and hydration levels are horrible, so no moving him yet. Ezra fought being annoyed, getting stranded in the unknown region once, but perfectly fine. The medic nodded. Windu turned to face him and squared his shoulders. Ezra fought the urge not to say something snarky or roll his eyes. There was no hero or necessity to pull him out if he offended Windu. My name is Mace Windu. I'm the Grand Master of the Jedi Order and High General of the GAR. Who are you? Ezra raised an eyebrow at the titles and frantically tried to come up with an answer. I know who you are, but I'm not particularly comfortable with having an audience. Mace looks around the room at the clones before fixing Ezra with an unimpressed glare. Too bad. Criff? Well, there went asking for it nicely. Ezra shrugged. Then I guess I've got nothing to say. Mace looked at him sharply. You'd rather get thrown in the brig and left till we reach Corkund and come before the council than talk to me in the presence of the clones? Ezra gave in to the urge and rolled his eyes. This guy was so full of it. First of all, putting me in the brig is like giving me a get-out-of-jail-free card. I'd be off this ship in under 15 minutes if you do that. Ezra put up his hands, now free of handcuffs, and shrugged. Secondly, that would defeat the purpose of you wanting to ask me questions. May stared at him, then down at the empty cuffs, and then over at what Ezra assumed was his second-in-command. They seemed to have a silent conversation before Mace turned to him again. Can I at least have your name? No. Jabba the Hutt. Ezra spat sarcastically. Windu scowled but motioned the clones out of the medbay. Ezra watched them all go before glancing up, looking for security cameras. There are no security cameras here, Mace said, leaning against the cabinets across from Ezra's bed. Ezra looked over at him. What about listening devices? On a Gar destroyer? Mace raised an eyebrow. You're a bit paranoid. Ezra fixed the man who knew nothing about just how paranoid he was with a glare that he'd learned from Hera. When you come from where I come from, you've got good reason to. Mace stared at him for a moment. There are no monitoring devices in here. The medical machinery puts them on the fritz being this close to them. Ezra reached out just enough to feel that Windu was telling the truth on the Force before relaxing back into his pillows. All right, what do you want to know? Let's start with your name, Mace decided, because we both know it's not Jabba the Hutt. Ezra smirked. Fair enough. My name is Ezra Bridger. I was born 16 RS. Mace froze and just stared at him. Ezra grinned, relishing in his shock. This was going to be vastly amusing. That's 3 years in the future, Windu said, slowly going ashen and stilling. Ezra tucked that piece of information away in his mind for now. Yep. Mace slowly sat down on the nearest area, which happened to be another medical cot. Are you saying that you're from the future? Ezra grinned, and honestly, he really should be concerned about how grey Mace looked or how wrong it was to be enjoying this, as much as he was. But for the moment, he simply enjoyed the waves of shock rolling off the seasoned master. Yep. Oh, Force. Time travel. Time travel. JediEzra Avelel. Mace repeated the words in his mind a few times, trying to get his brain to wrap around them. It wasn't working. Time travel? Yep. The boy, Ezra, popped the P in the world and nodded cheerily. Mace really wanted the nice bottle of spotchka he had in his desk drawer now. How? No clue. Ezra beamed at him like this was a common thing. That was definitely a headache behind his eyes. Mace inhaled deeply and proceeded to work through all the breathing exercises he knew. When he opened his eyes again, Ezra was now poking through the medbay cabinets no longer attached to the medical monitors. Ulsa was going to have his head. What are you doing? Mace asked weakly, still trying to get a bearing on his world that felt like it was spinning uncontrollably. Looking for a med scanner? Ezra shrugged, continuing searching. Mace did more breathing exercises. Okay, how can you prove that? Mace decided on. Ezra shrugged, having found the med scanner, and now seated back on the bed, legs crossed beneath him. Dunno. Never time traveled before. Not sure what I can say without making the future worst. True, but you do want to change the future? Mace asked, trying to keep up. Criff, yes, Ezra said like it was obvious. The future is horrible. I'm in no hurry to help it happen again. This time, in the future. Kark, this is confusing. Mace could relate. The headache was now becoming a migraine. What's so bad about it? Mace asked, unsure if he really wanted to know. He was debating, simply telling the kid to shut the criff up about everything and let what Ezra looked up from bed. What I know. Mace eyed the disassembled scanner. And how do you plan to do that? I need a clone who won't ask questions and a lot of holo recordings of the Chancellor. And a stun gun. Ezra listed deadpan. Mace stared. I thought you didn't want to have this conversation with the clones around. I don't. I plan on stunning the clone before he comes anywhere near me, checking what I need to check, and then removing them before going back to our conversation. Ezra explained, casually going back to what he was doing. Mace resisted the urge to choke on air and mentally cursed out whatever or whoever had sent him this boy. You want to stun a clone, check something with a destroyed med scanner, and then kick them out before you'll tell me anything? I thought you wanted to give me answers. I do. But think of it this way. I think I know things. But there's a chance that what I know might be slightly different from the truth. Time distorts a lot of things. What I know is dangerous. Ezra looked up and met Mace's eyes with frightening competence. I just don't want to get it wrong. It made an unfair amount of sense. Mace just didn't want to agree that it did. Fine. The smile Ezra gave him was nothing short of unsettling as Mace sent the requests through to Pons and then promptly ignored the responses from his commander. Will you at least tell me what's up with your shields? Mace asked tiredly. All this mental gymnastics made him want to sleep for a week. He was pretty sure he'd earned it. You mean the past, where they're like Beskar, or the part where you got a headache trying to crack them? Ezra asked with a smug smirk as he clicked back together the med scanner.
Ma!
Mace noted that there were quite a few pieces now sitting on the bed and decided that was a problem for future Mace. Both. Sorry about that. Ezra did not sound sorry at all. My shields have to be impenetrable because I'm constantly being hunted, and they hurt because if you try and break them, they protect themselves. The implications of that Mace did not want to think about. And your crystal? Mace asked, thinking of the feral crystal and the absolutely baffling saber. Yeah, picked that up in the unknown regions. Not sure what it is, save for a kyber crystal. It was in this old, spooky temple, and when I found it, the temple tried to kill me. Ezra shrugged like that. Wasn't wildly concerning. Couldn't tell you what it was to how it became a darksaber. Mace was slowly coming to terms with the fact that everything about Ezra Bridger was going to make 0 sense. You found a kyber crystal in the unknown regions that when you took it, the Guardian Temple tried to kill you for, and you just kept it? Mace repeated. Ezra shrugged. Yeah? Mace's brain hurt so much he was pretty sure it had stopped functioning a while ago. Are you insane? Ezra grinned widely, which was truly terrifying, and shrugged. Does anyone ever answer yes to that question? Mace buried his face in his hands and groaned. Force, help me! You are Sol Kenobi's problem when we reach Coruscant. Oh, are you talking about lineage? Ezra asked eagerly, Criffing bouncing like a Padawan on Life Day, because as far as I know, I'm not in Kenobi's lineage. Mace suddenly had a very bad feeling about this whole situation. He'd assumed Ezra was part of Kenobi's lineage, or perhaps Voss's, but the way the boy was grinning did not spell anything good for his hopes and dreams. Resigned, he sighed. What lineage are you in? Ezra's grin was blinding and a tad too innocent to be believable. Yours, because of course he was. Okay, to be fair, Ezra did feel kind of bad about how completely unnerved Mace seemed with him. But this was so much better than dealing with Thrawn. There was interaction with sentient beings, and there was dealing with Chiss, and they were two very different things. Force Ezra couldn't remember the last time he'd sat down and really talked with another being in Criff years. This was very therapeutic. Mace let out another sound of distress from where he'd buried his face in his hands. Ezra figured he probably should go over and check in on him after letting him wallow in shock for the last 10 minutes. You good? Ezra asked, poking Mace's side. No. Mace mumbled back, voice muffled by his hands. Ezra nodded decisively. All right. You gonna be okay? There was a moment of silence. Aye!
Timmy, cool.
Cool. Ezra nodded, letting the issue slide for now. He didn't feel anything truly concerning in Mace's Force signature, except for shock. He could let it go for now. Mace's comm vibrated again. You gonna get that? Ezra asked. Mace let out another indistinct sound.
Cool.
Cool. Ezra tugged the comm off Mace's belt and over to his hand with a slight tug in the Force. Hey. Mace jerked up. Pons says he's got the stuff I asked for. You mind? Ezra tossed the comm back to Mace. By all means. Mace grumbled sarcastically. Ezra ignored it and flicked the door open with another use of the Force. The commander stepped through weaponless and holding a stack of data pads but no stun gun. Ezra raised a pointed eyebrow at the lack of a stun gun as the doors slid closed again. That's it? I did not feel you can find a way to work Ezra in the distance until the chip was triggered, but he was unsure just how much the chip could be used to spy on others with it. Could Sidious hear this conversation? Mo! Only one way to find out. Ezra turned back around and signaled that they both be quiet. He flipped the scanner on and began scanning Pons's head without explanation. He saw the way Pons and Mace silently conversed, clearly confused, but ignored it as he scanned Pons' right temple. The scanner beeped and displayed the unknown item in the brain. Ezra flipped it off satisfied. The chip really was there. Now for the rest of his problems. What was that? Pons demanded. Ew. That'll be all for now, Ezra said, channeling his inner hearer and leaving no room for argument. Pons shot Mace a confused look, but Mace simply sighed and nodded for Pons to leave. Ezra waited until the doors were firmly closed behind Pons before facing Mace. Well, that didn't go as planned. What exactly did you expect? You dropped out of the sky, acted like a deranged Force user, and then proceeded to practically thumb your nose in the face of our authority. And that's not touching on the whole time-traveling Grand Padawan thing. Metis snapped. Ah, so still a little touchy on the subject then. Ezra shrugged and began flipping through the holo recording of Sidious Pons had gotten him. It's not like I asked to time travel. Criff Sidious actually didn't look disgustingly evil. He sort of looked grandfatherly. Ezra resisted the urge to gag. What was that scan? Mace sighed, changing the subject. Ezra handed him the scanner. A foreign item in his head. Organic material, but not his DNA. It doesn't show up on regular brain scans. What is it? Mace asked, frowning at the scan. An inhibitor chip, Ezra said, repeating what he'd been told by Rex and Ahsoka. From what I know, if you were to ask the Kaminoans what they are, they'd say they were to hinder aggression. In an army? Maeve frowned and looked up at Ezra. Then what?
Mace's brain shut off, or at least part of it had, because he was pretty sure that if it hadn't, he'd be freaking out right now. A what now? A plot to commit genocide against the Jedi, Ezra said seriously, no longer teasing or cavalier. He was serious. He was serious. This wasn't a joke. Mace suddenly had a very bad feeling about the implications of it all. You said you were born 3 years in the future. Yes. Ezra cut him off softly. Yes, it happened. Yes, it worked. And by the time I can remember, there were no Jedi. Mace closed his eyes and really thought about it, ridiculousness notwithstanding. He could see it in his mind's eye. The Jedi being hunted down if the Republic lost. Hunted like dogs by the droid armies simply for what they were. But he never entertained the idea that the clones would be the ones to do it. But it was a terrifying thought, but not altogether out of the question. Skywalker and his Padawan had run into a parasite similar to what Ezra was describing, and if a living organism could do it, science was never far behind. The horrible thing about the whole situation was that it wasn't out of the question. It was even disgustingly plausible. Well, not the time travel, but the other stuff, yeah. Say, I believe you. Mace opened his eyes to find Ezra watching him nervously. If you were born after the genocide, what happened to you? Ezra shifted from foot to foot, clearly uneasy with telling his story. Before I was trained, my ability to touch the Force was drastically reduced. I didn't even notice it. As far as I can remember, I never moved anything by accident or did anything remotely Jedi-like when I was growing up. It probably saved my life. I lost my parents young, so I grew up on the streets. That's how I met a survivor of the Purge. Mace nodded along, Deepa. What? Ezra blinked at him, confused. No, I never met Deepa. Mace blinked slowly. You said Grand Padawan? Ezra blinked and then ducked his head, looking sheepish. Stang? I did, didn't I? I guess I meant Great-Grand Padawan. Caleb. Mace nodded, understanding now. Deepa would never have let her Padawan be this feral, even if Caleb could be overconfident at times. Ezra blinked again, pausing. Yeah, I guess he was. Is? Kark, this is confusing. Mace couldn't help but snort and smile in commiseration with the kid. Yeah. I take it you didn't know him as Caleb? Yeah? No. You didn't use your real name if you were a Force user then. Especially if you were on the Temple Registry, Ezra shrugged. I didn't have that problem, but Kanan did. Kanan. Mace turned the name over in his head and tried to imagine what his Grand Padawan would look like, all grown up, if everything had gone to blazes. He also made a mental note to take a look at the protocols on the temple security over the registry. Names of Jedi shouldn't be easy to get at all. So, he taught you? Mace encouraged Ezra to keep going. Yeah, well, what he knew. He did end up getting knighted in the Lothal Temple, though. Ezra nodded, looking wistful as he remembered. We were in a crew that was fighting back against the government that rose after the Republic fell. Wait, Mace frowned, taking in Ezra's words. The Separatists didn't win? What? Hundo. Ezra looked part scandalized, part confused. The Republic won. The Purge happened directly after. A cold feeling flooded Mace's gut. He'd been wondering how the Separatists got the clones to kill the Jedi, but this? They won. They still all died. There was no way out. So what was the government? Mace managed to ask, throat tight, at the revelation there was a chance they'd never see win. The Republic was reformed into a Sith-led galactic imperial empire. Ezra said, and then hesitated a moment before continuing. Led by Emperor Palpatine. Or Darth Sidious. Mace, if this was, whether Mace believed him or not, there was no going back. Sidious's name was now out in the open like a gray cloud of smog, choking him with its presence. It was a powerful accusation, Ezra knew, one that could topple governments and rattle the foundations of the Republic. But it was true. Ezra could only hope Mace could feel it too. Force, Mace murmured, leaning back, so his weight was supported by the wall behind him, hand fluttering up to his mouth. We had heard the Sith Lord was in control of the Senate, but we dismissed it as lies. Are you certain? Ezra bit back a bitter, biting response. They would not help the poor man who was clearly going into shock, considering he tried to kill and manipulate me 3 years ago. He made sure to pitch his voice quieter instead of scathing, and made his Force signature calm instead of annoyed. He was really starting to think Mace might be the one needing medical attention by the time they were done. Yeah, I am. Mace let out a shuddering, halting breath. So he is the master, and the Sith Obi-Wan killed 10 years ago was the apprentice. Ezra turned sharply to look at Mace, mind churning over those words. The apprentice wouldn't happen to be a red and black Zabrak that is now missing his bottom half, would it? Mace looked up slowly to meet Ezra's eye warily. Do I want to know how you know that? Ezra thought of Maul and his sheer desperation and the loneliness he'd felt rolling off him, and old Obi-Wan Kenobi pulling him to his feet with a kind but tired smile. Probably not. Of course not. Mace groaned, burying his face in his hands again. Of course not. Ezra hesitantly came closer to the older man. Are you okay? Kark, no, Mace grumbled from under his hands. Ezra winced. Stupid question, right? Can I do anything to help? Mace looked at him through a crack between his fingers. No. Ezra winced again. Right. Can I get anyone that can help you? Mace let put a cross between a sigh and a groan, sitting up and letting his hands fall. No. Meditate with me. Ezra blinked. What? Meditate with me. I need it, and you're vibrating with so much pent-up emotion that I can feel it over my own. It will do us both some good. Now sit, Mace said, booking no room for argument. Part of Ezra wanted to groan because he still had so much to cover. But the other, more Jedi-like part of him rationally pointed out that Mace was right. He did need to release all the stress and panic in him, now or later. Ezra was pretty sure none of the Jedi would approve of his normal methods of releasing his emotions or getting into the headspace to meditate. Ahsoka had made it quite clear that hunting something down and killing it while meditating was definitely not the Jedi way. It was very useful for survival, though. Ezra sighed and gave in, going over and sitting cross-legged on his medbed across from Mace and closing his eyes. He could already feel Mace's signature sinking into meditation, a state that felt like something between sleeping and awareness. He had a tougher time grasping it. Over the years, he'd trained himself to be constantly alert even when asleep. In doing so, meditation had become something that happened while he was doing another mindless task, like while in hyperspace or hunting or fighting. Kanan had called it battle meditation. Ahsoka had pointed out it was also moving meditation. Maul had grinned all canines and sharp eyes and declared it dangerous. Thrawn hasn't said much of it, though. Ezra guessed it annoyed him because it meant Ezra never had a vulnerable moment. But it made regular meditation hard. Ezra reached out and thought of Atollon and its desolate spaces and airless winds and eerie calls from the canyons and the utter nothingness of the place, and let his mind drift there. He breathed with the wind and soon found himself in a shallow meditation. Mace was right. He had a lot of pent-up emotion. Here, envisioning Atollon, they came in the form of the howling winds. Ezra let them one by one wash over him before letting them pass. Fear, doubt, uncertainty, anger, hopelessness, helplessness, despair, stress, nervousness. They all came and went until, finally, it was quiet enough to hear the chattering of the native oversized spiders. Ezra released the image and floated quickly back to the surface, where he sat in the destroyer's medbay. He stared up at the white ceiling. He didn't know the name of the ship he was on. He looked down to find Mace still deep in meditation. Figured. Ezra had gotten good at meditating well and fast over the years. One didn't have the luxury of time in a war. He did feel better and more settled now that he had dealt with it all instead of shoving it in the back of his mind to stew. He felt slightly bad about not offering to meditate with Mace, but he wasn't ready for anyone to be in his shields again for a long time. He took a moment to think over the last few hours. Days? Weeks? He had been so close, almost home. And Izzy, almost back with Hera and Sabine and Zeb, and the little life now hopefully recognized in Hera. And now he was here in the past, separated not just by unknown distances, but decades from them. He took a moment to let his sheer grief wash over him. He just wanted to go home. It wasn't fair. He'd given almost everything he'd had to the cause, to the rebellion, to making a future for himself and others. One without fear and danger and hate, and he'd come so close to seeing it. And now he was back at the beginning of the nightmare, on the other side of his happy ending. At the beginning of the tragedy, instead of the end. It wasn't fair. He was on the other end of destiny, and he didn't even get to see it. To taste his efforts, to know it was worth it. To know if they'd won it all. Ezra shook his head physically to shake the thought away quickly. They had to have won. They had to have, because if they hadn't, he'd lose his mind. No, Hera and Zeb and Sabine and Ahsoka and all the others he'd known or never gotten the chance to, they'd won. They'd made it out. They'd survived. They'd lived. They had. And now he had to keep pushing through, keep fighting for them. He had a chance here to make it better, to make it right, to fix everything, for good. Ezra picked up the data pads Pons had given him and set to work, ignoring the thoughts that whispered he'd never really know if his family had won or even survived. That whispered he could make it all so much worse. That whispered there was no way back. Ezra grit his teeth and stared down at the image of Palpatine smiling like a grandfather would at the camera. If he couldn't go back, then the only way out was forward. Mace really wasn't sure what to do with all the information he'd just been given. Yes, it was all important, a matter of life and death even, but what to do about it was the problem. He couldn't very well accuse the Chancellor of treason without any evidence to back it up other than the word of a time-traveling child. And he couldn't address the problem of the chips in the clones without risking a wider system reaction. If they removed a few chips, they had no way of knowing. The system wouldn't have a safeguard and trigger the rest. He had all this sensitive information and no clear way to use it. And, of course, he also had a feral young adult that he'd have to explain how he'd acquired. Mace inhaled deeply as he slowly came out of his meditation. First, he needed a nap. Then he needed to get in contact with the investigation sector of the temple to open a fraud investigation against the Senate in general. And then he needed to call up the council and brief them that they'd be having a sealed closed-door meeting when they returned. And possibly read up on the science behind biochips. Yeah, he had a lot to do. And, of course, he'd have to figure out something to tell Pons and his men that didn't give anything away too soon. He opened his eyes to find Ezra tinkering with the datapad that was currently in 4 floating pieces and many tiny screws. And he needed to figure out what to do with the delinquent in his care. "What are you doing?" Mace asked, voice coming out so much more tired than he'd expected. Ezra blinked, straightening and bonking his head on what looked like the back panel of the datapad as he did so. "You're up." Mace raised an eyebrow at the younger man's wide grin. "Did you meditate at all?" "Yep. I've gotten to the point that when I do, it's very quick and shallow." Ezra nodded, rubbing the spot on his head that he'd smacked. "How about you? Did it help?" Mace stretched, sitting up, and watched as Ezra went back to what he was doing. Yes, it did. Ezra hummed, pulling out some wires from the depth of the internal workings of the datapad. "Good. What are you doing?" Mace asked, squinting at the datapad pieces. "Rewiring the datapad, so it can't be remotely sliced." Ezra said, like it was obvious, "Can't slice it if you can't understand it." "I take it this was a standard procedure where you come from?" Mace asked, testing his vertigo as he slowly stood. "Yep." Ezra glanced up at him as he began reassembling the datapad. "You gonna keel over on me? 'Cause you almost did earlier." Mace snorted and stretched his arms above his head. "I don't think so." "Good." Ezra clicked the datapad together and booted it back up, "'cause explaining that to your commander would be awkward." Mace chuckled at the thought. "Yes, it would. I need to explain this somehow to my people, and I'm pretty sure you need food. How would you like to get out of here?" Ezra lit up. "Really? I'm not a flight risk or anything? Seeing as we've established that you could have broken out at any time but haven't, no, you're fine." Mace shook his head, slightly surprised at his own words. "And I need Kaf." "Ah, Criff, yes." Ezra grinned, hopping to his feet and shoving the datapad into a pocket of his cargo pants. Mace sighed. Deppa had never been this vulgar or unhinged when she was this age. How exactly did he acquire an elder Padawan responsibility again? He unlocked the med bay door with a gratuitous use of the Force, but really, Mace's headache didn't care about using the Force frivolously right now. Kark, he needed calf. Serg? Pons asked uncertainty as he stepped out, Ezra in tow. He's fine, Mace mumbled, rubbing his eyes. I need calf. Sir? Pons asked more forcefully, and no small part concerned, as Mace headed down the hall without acknowledging him. Pons knew he had a slight calf problem. Mace really didn't care right now. Pons, do you happen to have an Ori Vode type VOD that I can sick on our resident feral guest? Mace asked bluntly, leaning against the cool side of the turbo lift after punching the button for the mess hall level. I'm flattered. Ezra deadpanned with a grin. There was something wrong with that boy. Serg? Pons said hesitantly, eyes bouncing between Mace, who was sure he looked terrible, and Ezra, who didn't look bothered at all. Permission to speak freely. Granted, Mace mumbled, pressing the back of his head against the cool metal. It helped a bit. Sir, what the cark is going on? Pons asked bluntly with a hint of hysteria in his otherwise calm voice. Oh, could Mace relate? He winced as the lift dinged, coming to a stop. Mace shoved himself off the wall with a good deal of effort as the lift door slid open, assaulting his senses with sound, smell, and signatures. I'll let you know when I figure it out. Ezra snorted, and Pons spluttered as he exited. Dang Ferric, he needed calf. And a nap, and food, and a really long vacation, and a raise. Not exactly in that order.
1 second he was this close to strangling Thrawn for poking this week's new alien species with a stick and making them mad. Thus, they were now trying to eat them, and the next second, he was falling. Ezra didn't get the time to let out an unprofessional scream before he landed on his back. The air left his chest on impact, and everything hurt. Ezra fought to breathe and choked on the dust in the air, and then stopped. Thrawn and him had been in a mud ball of a planet, not a dust ball. Ezra officially had no clue where he was. Blaster fire ripped him out of his moment as he threw himself behind the closet cover. No matter where he was at what part of his life, getting shot at seemed to be a constant. He fell into a battlefield mindset with ease, taking in his surroundings. An unknown planet with minimal cover and unknown terrain. Ezra chanced the look behind him at his opponent and just about laughed. Ancient separatist models if he was right. Last time Ezra had seen those, he'd seen rickety droids. His limits were dropping his center of gravity low. He reached out and grasped a hold of the data processing in the nearest battle droid, feeling the hum of data flow transmitting back to their commander droid and eventually the processing center that controlled them. The wireless transfer hummed as he sank into battle meditation Kanan had taught him and listened to the data flow. Kanan had taught him how to be a Jedi. Rex had taught him how to be a warrior. Maul had taught him how to be a powerful threat. And Thrawn had begrudgingly taught him how to be a master strategist. It was on that Ezra drew on. He exhaled slowly and focused on the data streaming past him and began logically deducting the probabilities of the security code. Spending 3 years with Thrawn had taught him patience and precision when it came to the strategic thinking process. Now, deducting the correct security passcode of billions is nearly impossible, but finding the right data stream to the security it? Not so impossible. Ezra tightened his grip on the transmission and carefully sorted through the lines before finding the security line. Tracing it over the desolate planet through the automated switchboard and up to the blockade ship above wasn't that hard. Ezra grinned as he yanked the line as hard as possible from the servers deep inside the ship. The line shuddered and died. In his mind's eye, Ezra could see the server room erupt into flames, setting off a cascade of reactions. The droid army stalled out and then sputtered and died. Success. Ezra stood looking over